Richards, and as Bob said, for many, many years I worked in the Department of Education putting up an accountability system. It is very different than the accountability system that's being put up now. And I'm deeply troubled by the accountability system that's being put up now. When I was asked to talk tonight, I kind of thought about different ways of approaching it. And one way that's very attractive is to make a long list of all the reasons that high-stakes testing is harmful. And I've done that, and the list indeed is long, and I think we'll probably cover a lot of it tonight. But when I make a list like that, I'm leaving it up to you, the audience, to believe that what I'm saying is true. And instead of doing that, what I wanted to do tonight was to look at some of the things that RIDE says are true, and to see how well they stand up to analysis and an accurate kind of dissection of the numbers that are behind what they assert. So that's why I'm talking about what is it that we can actually believe about high-stakes testing. And I only want to look at two things, because we could look at lots and lots of things, and if we did, I would never get done. First of all, I want to look at high-stakes testing in relation to students with disabilities. Yep, let's look at the next little slide. Now, what I wanted to say, this is a little bit of a lecture about how facts get tossed around in the education debate. But if you don't look at evidence, you'll never get an accurate understanding of how things work. And so, with respect to the current high-stakes testing, I want to show you evidence about two ways it's not working. The first is, it does not work for students with IEPs in Massachusetts. And the reason I want to talk about Massachusetts is that it's held up as the example for why we should have high-stakes testing. It looks like it really works. Everybody achieves high scores in Massachusetts, and it's pretty hard to argue against that kind of success. So I want to look at that success a bit more carefully. And the second thing that RIDE is not taking into account as it puts up its policy of high-stakes testing is the impact of wealth on student performance. And in fact, RIDE spends a lot of time denying that there is a connection between wealth and student performance. What they like to say is, when you think about wealth, you're making excuses for not teaching, and it's really the teacher that makes the difference. So I'd like to look into that particular claim as well to see whether we can believe it. So let's go back to Massachusetts, or go up north, and take a look at what Massachusetts test scores in the 10th grade look like. Now, I've shown you the test scores on the left from 1998 all the way to the right on 2013, which are the latest test scores that are available on their website. This is all publicly available data. And indeed, it certainly looks like a wonderful success story. That line goes up from left to right. But then I realized, wait a minute, in that time span, there's a significant amount of time in which Massachusetts was not using the test in a high-stakes fashion. If you begin in 1998, whoops, go back, I'm still on that chart. If you begin in 98, I first wrote numbers, I think, in 99. You see a pair of numbers there, you probably can't read them, but I believe it's 34 and 24. And then in 2004, when they made the requirement that students pass the MCAS, I put a pair of numbers, and they're 62 and 57. So I subtracted those numbers and divided by the number of years, and I noticed that gives me a rough idea of how fast scores are accelerating over that time span. So about 4% per year, or 6% per year. And then I looked at that long right section from when they instituted the test requirement to current day, and did the same kind of arithmetic. And the scores are rising at a slower rate, considerably slower, 3% per year, and about 3%, a little less than 3%. So what is it that those scores may be telling us? And if you know about Massachusetts, the story behind this whole high stakes testing thing was the state lost a suit that said it wasn't fairly funding its schools, it wasn't adequately funding its schools. So it was then under a court order to go ahead and do that, and it created all this legislation around how it would do it. And so it created a funding formula, it fully funded the funding formula, and it spent a lot of money on teacher professional development. And it's put a lot of money into the poor districts. And then, around 2004, that money began to equalize. And by 2008, when the recession hit, things were not really good in Massachusetts. Not as bad as they are in Rhode Island, but the funding tailed off. So what I'm thinking is, it is as likely that that pattern that we see up there results from underlying formula and formula aid and professional development as it does from a high stakes testing requirement. And so that's something that I really think is an open question, and people haven't really convinced me that it's high stakes testing that's brought around the Massachusetts miracle. So next, let's go on. So if you look behind, what I was showing you were averages. And every average is made up of a whole bunch of subscores. And if you look at what the MCAS is doing in terms of the kids with IEP, it has a disproportionately negative impact on students in special education. And these are two statements that I think dramatize how negative that is. But since 2003, the year before the requirement kicked in, the number of seniors failing the MCAS has decreased. Well, we already know that. We saw that on the chart. But the number of seniors with IEPs failing the MCAS has increased, and you didn't see that on the chart. If you saw that on the chart, you'd see a line going down. There's no line going down. So what you realize is that the average that they're showing you is hiding a lot of diversity, and some of this diversity is really not very good. The other way to put this or talk about this is that in 2003, at the beginning of this, seniors with IEP were 5 times more likely to fail the MCAS than their general education classmates. But then recently, that percentage has increased, and they're now 15 times more likely to fail. So there is no way you can talk about the MCAS having a good effect on kids with IEP in Massachusetts. So let's have another picture here. Before we go on, let's think a minute about what this means, because after 2003, those kids who I just talked about are not getting diplomas, or many, many fewer of them. And so what are the harms associated with that? First of all, if you don't have a diploma, you earn nearly 40% less than students who only have a diploma. I'm not talking about students with any kind of college education. I'm just talking about other high school kids who have a diploma. You're earning 40% less than they are. The average national unemployment rate is 50% higher than the unemployment rate for students who have only diploma. I garbled that. The national unemployment rate for kids without diplomas is 12.5%, which is 50% higher than the unemployment rate for students who only have diplomas. So you're much less likely to get a job, and if you do get a job, you're going to earn a lot less. So that is the harm that the MCAS is inflicting on kids with IEPs. I was at our last panel discussion there, I'm paraphrasing a quotation. One of the things that the Department of Ed likes to ask rhetorically is, what's worse than giving a diploma to a student who doesn't pass the NECAP? That's deceitful, you're not doing him any good, he's going out there without any skills. And the answer from the panel was, Withholding a diploma from a student who doesn't pass the NECAP is worse. It's a lot worse. And so this is something really I think that we have to think about. It is a huge policy issue, and we don't have a good answer right now. And just to put in a picture what I put in words before, this is the percentage of seniors with IEPs who have not passed the NCAS over the years. So you see in 2004, for some reason, the percentage dipped. That was great. But it just bounced right up, and it's been going up and up and up ever since. So there's something terribly wrong about the MCAS for kids with IEPs. So if you look at that chart, you have that chart in mind, it's almost impossible to argue that the current system is raising standards for students with IEPs. That is the whole reason for a high-stakes testing system. It raises standards, which means it puts pressure on everybody and everybody does better. But what we're seeing here is that education is not getting better for this subset of students. Instead, this is where I think Anne gets upset. It appears that the MCAS system has evolved into a method of depriving some of our most vulnerable students of a decent future. So that is, I think that's a huge concern that we have to all take seriously. So what could be some alternatives? I want to just break the narrative for a minute. And we have talked in these, a lot of discussions come around to what is called a compensatory system of multiple measures. And in a compensatory system, other evidence can supersede the test. In other words, the test is not the last word, and the test can be wrong. The test can give a false high-stakes testing systems. And 50 of them allow the individualized education plan, the IEP, to determine the team that oversees that to determine if the student should receive a high school diploma. The justification for that policy is that the student's IEP team has access to a lot of information about the student's competence across all kinds of academic domains and sources. They've been with that kid ever since he got into high school. And therefore, that team is in the best position to judge the student's academic proficiency. So if you go along with it this far, then there's a general logic emerging, which is let those who know the student best make the graduation decision. And it's hard to argue that some testing company up in New Hampshire scoring the MCAS or scoring the NECAP knows any student in Rhode Island very well. And then the next general question that I ask myself is, how far could this approach be extended to other vulnerable students? And immediately, English language learners come to mind, but also poor kids. And I'm going to talk about them next. So, back to the notion of creating an accurate understanding. High-stakes testing policy does not take into account the impact of wealth on student performance. And before we go on, I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that wealth directly influences student performance. That would mean if you're poor, you can't learn. If you're rich, you're a great learner. That's not what I'm talking about here. I am talking about the fact that if you are poor, that wealth influences many factors that do influence learning. There's something called family academic resource, and it's measured by the number of books in your family. I don't know how many books you have at home, but it's probably more than 10. If you have less than 10, you're probably not going to do well on the NECAP. And so the notion of how many academic resources your family has is important and is reflective of wealth. How often your family moves, the kind of nutrition that you get, and there's a long list of things that you begin to see, yeah, they really do directly influence academic performance that are directly related to wealth. But this is not a new finding. Whatever measures we have used in the past to measure wealth, and there are lots and lots of them. Lots and lots of research shows that wealth, as a general measure for all these other things, has a much more powerful influence on student performance than students. It's about 80% of the impact of how a student does, and teachers have the rest of the 20%. So if you're in good shape, if you come from a very stable, wealthy family, your teacher can add something or subtract something, but you'll still be pretty, you'll still do pretty well. The fact that wealth has such an impact on kids does not mean that we should ignore teacher performance. But we make a huge mistake, as we currently do, to act like it's the sole or primary cause of student performance. So here's what it looks like to look at student scores without thinking about wealth. These are all the districts, and these are the percent proficient on the 11th grade NECAP. And they're from the lowest scoring district on the left, which happens to be Central Falls, to the highest scoring district on the right, which is Barrington. And often scores are displayed this way. Not just NECAP scores, but international test scores, NECAP scores, NAEP scores, SAT scores. A lot of scores are just shown in the list ranked from top to bottom. So if you look at this list and you're a policymaker, you can say, well, gee, South Kingston, East Greenwich, and Barrington are super achievers. And on the other side, Central Falls, Pawtucket, and Woonsocket are low achievers. Barrington, if you want to do a comparison, is over 55 percentage points higher than Central Falls. That's 350% lower than Central Falls. It's 350% lower than Barrington. Central Falls is a failing system. That's part of teachers. So now let's take a look at what happens if you take wealth into account. This is the same districts in the same order, but showing family median income, average family median income for the district. Now, I don't know how familiar you are, but that black line is a different kind of average. It's the average score when you take wealth into account. And what I've done is put the districts that are beating the average in green, and the districts that are below the average in red. And when you do that, it's very interesting what you see. You have a completely different list. First of all, for the math guys in the room, there's something called an R-squared, which is the amount of variation that wealth accounts for in this graph. And it's about 4/5. It's 0.78, rounded to 8.8. You're very close to getting the standard 80% of variation attributable to wealth. And so you see that the little, the distances above and below the line are probably what the impact of either a high performance school district or a low performance school district. So all of a sudden you have some high performance school districts that you hadn't really thought about before, and you would never think about in the old list. On this new list, you've got West Warwick, Bristol Warren, and South Kingston as school districts where you might want to look and see what's going on, because they're beating the wealth curve. They're doing better than the wealth of their students would predict. And then you might want to go look at Burrillville, Narragansett, and North Smithfield and wonder what in the world is wrong there, because they're not doing very well by their students given how many home resources their students bring to the school. And the one that really, I don't mean to shame any district, but the one that really surprised me there was Narragansett. I mean, I've never heard anybody complain or worry about Narragansett. But if you look at it this way, maybe somebody should. Anyway, the other thing that you begin to see is that there aren't these huge 55% differences when you take wealth into account, that everybody's pretty close to that line. The highest and the lowest achievers are less than 20 percentage points apart. So there are no super achievers. There are no high, super low achievers. So all of a sudden, the hysteria that accompanied the, sort of the discussion of test scores that was there when you just did a straight top to bottom ranking is much more muted. And so the notion that you really need to implement huge policy changes immediately is much more suspect. So let me wrap this up if I can. So let's get back to what we can believe about high-stakes testing. Well, first of all, I think it's less than what we were told to be. It's not good for all kids. We don't fully know how many or what kind of kid it's bad for yet. We just don't know that. It's not clear what role high-stakes testing plays in the rising test scores, but that's a line that's being pushed pretty hard. And those high-stake tests still measure something, probably many things, more associated with wealth than with schools and teachers. Yet the accountability system we're setting up is aimed at kids, schools, and teachers. So, this is my parting thought. From 2008 to 2012, I looked up the percentage of kids in the 12th grade. These are kids who have made it through 11 years of school. They're almost there. And this is the graduation rate in 12th grade. You see it's going down. And not, just almost inexorably down. And so that's puzzling to me. On the one hand, you can think, well, 2008 recession, school finances collapse, big hit. On the other hand, in that time period, we began to take a different attitude towards accountability. Whatever it is, it seems to me that we need an honest discussion about the kinds of policies that are driving our school systems. And what are the chances for having an open, honest discussion on this topic? Given my experience so far with the Board of Education, none, if we don't demand it. So that's another thing that I want. Finding around high-stakes testing is that it's very immune to public input. If anybody wants a copy of this, I'll email it to them. And there's my